how this started is I've always loved spooky stories. I came from a very practical family. We did not do anything ghostly, but I always loved Halloween, and I always loved, the stories of the mysterious ladies and the headless horseback riders. And so when I got out of college and worked in news, I would sometimes do double the work to be able to do a ghost story along with covering a city council meeting. So a few years ago, I was, I love to travel. I love to take ghost tours anywhere I go. And several years back, I realized Dallas didn't really have a ghost tour. And Mark had a crazy Cadillac limo in the driveway. So I combined my nerdiness for local lore with his 1978 Cadillac limo, and we started doing our first ghost tours. The caddy is a little fuzzy, and so we went ahead and decided to invest in this former DISD bus. And you will see that it actually does have a well fluid cleanup kit. You'll see that when the lights are on. And when we bought it, it did have its own supply of goldfish crackers on the floor. The bus does ride like a bus, but most of the time we're going to be going a lot more slowly than we are on Mockingbird.
It's like a bag of ice.
Exactly. It'll make you feel young again. So all these stories are things that I researched through old newspaper archive, Dallas Morning News, occasionally the Dallas Times Herald, sitting down at the Dallas Public Library and having the librarians bring out a box of clippings about local ghost stories. And then the more you do a tour like this, the more people will tell you about the weird stuff they've encountered. So if it's pertinent, I'm telling you about it. So if you live here in Dallas, if you're from the area, this is a pretty straightforward place. We're on the plains, it's pretty flat, but you can catch things out of the corner of your eye, and you may have guessed we are headed to one of our spookiest areas in town, White Rock Lake right now. Since Dallas was founded in the 1840s, it's grown really quickly, and in 1911, this area that we're driving through right now, this was the country, but as Dallas was rapidly growing, there was a need for a water supply, and so the lake was built. White Rock Lake is a man-made lake that was made to supply drinking water for the city. But by 1925, the city's growth had progressed so quickly, there were more people than the water, more people than they needed a bigger water source. And so the city gave the lake to the Dallas Parks Department. And lots of things happened on the lake. You could, at that point, we're familiar with things like fishing, jogging, bicycling, but back in those days, you could duck hunt. And there was even a party barge that would sail around the lake with a band playing, and you could buy a ticket and dance. During the Great Depression, the Conservation Civilian Corps built the park infrastructure, and then a few years later, the dorm buildings that the CCC lived in housed a new crowd. Anybody know who might have moved in here at White Rock Lake? The answer is Nazis.
Oh.
During World War II, the area near Winfrey Point, actually the baseball field, housed German officers who'd served in Rommel's Africa Corps. And they were held at the barracks at Winfrey Point. And then every day they were bused to Fair Park to work on repairing things for American servicemen, like tents and canteens, and then brought back to spend the night on the shores of White Rock Lake. So, but right now, we're going to make our first stop, and this little out-of-the-way place is Cox Cemetery. We can hop off here. Yeah. I'd pass out flashlights, but they would pale in comparison to this light here. And let me look at locked, but you can kind of like it goes all the way back there, and it goes. So this cemetery, Cox Cemetery, is named for a pioneer family that lived in this area, the Cox family.
They had, if you guys want to come in, the crickets are impressively loud this evening. But it was established in 1848, and the area that we're in, I talked about it being the countryside. Like, this was primarily like, it's kind of, it was a little slopey. The grass was nice. A lot of people had dairy farms around here, and the Cox family and the Dixon family had two of the biggest farms. If you live around the area, you may occasionally cross over the Dixon branch, which is a tributary of White Rock Lake. So just for a little context there. So the cemetery, imagine it if you will, being in the dark, crickets are on point. But you know, this was out in the middle of nowhere for a long time. And in the 1960s and 70s, it was a rite of passage for members of the Woodrow Wilson High School marching band to drop off freshman band members here, and it was up to them to find their way home. So it involved some walking, some hitchhiking. Again, it would have been much scarier in the days before cell phones and when this was pitch black. And this place has always been a little bit of a magnet for mischief here. It was, for decades, it was a popular place to meet people, or for teenagers to come out here, meet their friends, and drink beer. I mean, seriously, adults don't want to go hang out in cemeteries in the middle of the night. Like, if you can legally drink, you probably don't want to hang out in a cemetery. So, you know, where's the last place you're going to go look? Cemetery. In 1962, there was a group of 26 teenagers who were questioned by the Dallas police about some cemetery vandalism. Apparently, an angel statue that was on top of one of the graves back here mysteriously ended up with a bright day-glow coat of green paint, and red eyes had been painted on this angel. I didn't see that any arrests were made, but it was kind of a warning that they were brought in and questioned by the police. In 1972, there were two Garland High School students who were caught with a tombstone belonging to a teenage girl named Nora B. Lyon. She was a 13-year-old girl who had died almost 80 years before in 1890. These two students thought it would be a great prank to put this tombstone on top of their high school. And it didn't come to fruition, but they were busted in possession of this tombstone. The Garland police talked to these teenagers, and you know, they're a little foggy. All of a sudden their memories get a little foggy, and they're like, well, we found this tombstone in Dallas. So the tombstone goes to the Dallas Police Department and stays in the property room. And it's there that it catches the attention of a man named Captain Paul Cragen. And Captain Cragen would see it when he was visiting the property room, and it really bothered him that there was this young girl who was missing her tombstone. And so in his spare time, he starts to look through burial records, which were not the best at that point in time. And he just can't develop any leads about how to get this tombstone back to the little girl whose grave it should be on. And so finally he talks to his colleagues in Garland again and says, bring those kids in, you know, let them know they're not going to be in trouble, but see if you can do anything to jog their memory. Sure enough, they say, oh, we found it near White Rock Lake. Captain Cragen knows Cox Cemetery is the only cemetery in the vicinity of White Rock Lake. So he comes out here and he walks and he looks and he walks and he looks until he finds a little footstone with the initials NBL. And so almost a year after her tombstone went missing, Nora B. Lyon was reunited with the tombstone that matched her NBL footstone. As for the ghosts themselves, some people say they hear bells ringing in the cemetery. Some ghost hunters have taken video where they've seen orbs and things like that. Nothing really conclusive. You are in the middle of a very brightly lit, you know, the neighborhood has this fenced, probably thanks to many fun nights out, thanks to local teenagers. And, you know, they definitely limit the access to it, even though it is still an active cemetery. But, you know, definitely, it's definitely not seeing as much nightlife traffic as it did. But I do have kind of a funny, somewhat ghostly story about this spot. A friend of mine, in her high school years, Andrea was here drinking beer with some friends, and they're kind of in the middle of the cemetery, and they don't want to be detected by anyone. Everything's up, and they start to hear something kind of loud and see something big, and they hear rustling like in the bushes, and they are scared. And she's like, we were just frozen. We didn't know what or who it was until out into the moonlight pops the shape of a horse head. A neighborhood horse had gotten loose and was wandering around the backside of the cemetery. And with that, my friend Andrea and her friends decided to call it a night and go home. And with this, we will get back on the bus and get to the
Hello. I don't know if this is annoying. I'm not used to talking on the microphone all the time now, but so bear with me if it sounds like I'm about to sell you a timeshare or something like that. So as I told you, White Rock Lake is a bit of an oasis, and along with all the fun stuff, the boating, the swimming, the picnicking, the lakeshore drives, it's also seen a lot of death. Its waters have proven fatal for many people. I used to kayak on the lake on a regular basis, and it is surprising how even when it feels still when you're on shore, how big and powerful the wind can feel when you're in the middle of an open body of water. And while it seems like you could just swim to shore easily if things go wrong, it's always smart to wear your life jacket when you're on the lake. And know that we have a lot of runoff that comes in from Collin County and different cities north of us. And with that runoff, there are plenty of logs and snags and things like that that can make it really hard to get to shore. And there are many stories of people who drowned while swimming, sailing, or even speedboating back in the day. Most of the bodies were recovered, but I did read some stories where the bodies were never found. And they dredge the lake every few decades, and they're due for a dredging. It's kind of a hotly debated topic at this point, but I have a feeling that when the lake gets dredged here in the next, I'm going to say 5 or so years, there will definitely be some stories that are uncovered. A few years ago, I chatted with a Dallas resident named Renee Guerrero. He is he's someone who is interested in the supernatural, and he's also a writer. He wrote a novel called White Rock, where the lake definitely plays a central role in his story. And in doing his research for the book, he says there's a lot of spiritual residue around the lake. He talked to several people who nearly drowned in White Rock Lake, and according to Renee, many of these people swear that it feels like there's an invisible force trying to pull them down. He also said that he thinks of White Rock Lake as a magnet for souls. In 1939, a farmer from Mesquite was fishing near the lake's spillway when he hooked something really heavy, but it wasn't moving. And as he pulled harder and harder, all of a sudden, a man's arm popped out. Mr. Farmer is definitely freaked out. I'm sure he called us the nearby picnickers for help, and these people helped drag this body ashore. Now let's just think about that for a second. Back in 1939, you and I would call 911. Instead, these were some Can-Do people, and they got this body ashore themselves. And so they find a man who's taken his own life and waded into the waters, and they discover a note in the man's pocket. He'd been a theater ad salesman who'd fallen on hard times, run low on money, and decided he was going to end it all by wading out into the lake. One of the most shocking accidents here at White Rock Lake involved a pilot who was wildly stunting around the lake in 1934. People were just out here walking, fishing, and all of a sudden this plane comes out of nowhere and starts making these wild acrobatic maneuvers. Like, this is in the day when barnstorming was starting to become a big thing, and this plane is flying above the waters of the lake, but there's not a lot of clearance. Like, it's doing these crazy maneuvers and barely clearing the water time after time as it makes turn after turn around the lake. Finally, one of these turns, it's very unlucky, the wing of the plane catches the water, which causes the plane to overturn, and it plunges into 15 feet of water. The impact was so great that the nose of the plane was bogged in the mud at the bottom of the lake, and it was fatal for all 3 men on board: a flight instructor, his assistant, and a man named Jack Binion. That name may sound familiar to you because his brother Vinny Binion was a notorious Dallas gambler, gangster, and later on creator of the World Series of Poker. It's a story for another tour, but Vinny Binion was pretty much run out of town when a new sheriff was elected in Dallas County.
There's even a casino in Vegas called Indian.
Yep. It was like, there's some wild mob stories from the heyday of Dallas.
Even in Fort Worth, I think that there was Casino Beach was like a popular attraction for monsters back there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's neat.
So we're going to talk about Our Lady of the Lake, and it involves some elements that you see in some pretty common ghost stories. You've got a lady in white, and you've got a vanishing hitchhiker. I think that the story that's most like the Lady of the Lake is Resurrection Mary in Chicago, where you have dozens of reports of this beautiful woman who disappears from the back seats of taxi cabs, and it's always in front of a certain cemetery.
Yeah.
All right, everybody feel like they can see all right? Right now, right past you. Thank you.
Hello.
Some of y'all want to get on this side of me, and some want to get on the other. I'm very happy it is a still night because I don't necessarily love this when I'm doing this with my back to the water and it's cold. Because then you kind of get a little bit of a theme park feel with that. So the Lady of White Rock Lake. Sidebar: if you ever want to come watch the moonrise, this area is really beautiful, and especially when you have a super moon, it is really gorgeous to watch it come up over the lake from this dock. So the Lady of the Lake. She first is written about in 1945. People start talking about her. And then in 1953, her story really picks up some steam. A local newspaper columnist wrote a story about 2 Neiman Marcus employees who were driving around the lake and, passing some time on a hot summer night and enjoying a little bit of the lake breeze, when all of a sudden they see a woman who is clearly in distress walking up from the shores of the lake. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Guy Malloy, and Mrs. Malloy tells her husband Guy to stop the car. She sees that the girl is in trouble, she's wet, she needs help. And so Ms. Malloy told the newspaper columnist Frank X. Tolbert the girl spoke in a friendly, cultured way. She said she'd like to be taken to an address on nearby Gaston Avenue in the nearby Lakewood section. It was an emergency. She didn't explain what the problem was, and the Malloys were too polite to ask. She had long hair, which was beginning to dry in the night breeze, and Mrs. Malloy was now sure that this girl was wearing a Neiman Marcus dress. Now, that sounds like a little product placement to me. And
Very specific.
and Neiman Marcus does get name dropped a few other times in this story. But so she's very gracious, and she gets into the back of the Malloy's 2-door sedan. And when the car starts, Mrs. Malloy turns to say something to her passenger, but she's gone. And in the back, she and Mr. Malloy are like, "What's happened? Where is this woman?" They look back, and there is a puddle of water and nothing else. So the Malloys decide to go ahead and drive to this address on Gaston Avenue, where a middle-aged man answers the door and says yes, he had a daughter with long blonde hair who wore nothing but Neiman Marcus clothes. She drowned about 2 years ago when she fell off a pier at White Rock Lake, much like this one. So this story runs, and more people start to write into the newspaper and say, I've seen her too. We tried to give her a ride too. Like there's, and this is back in the day when, you know, if you gave a quote to the newspaper, they didn't just use your full name, they gave your entire address. And so some of the people lived in Little Forest Hills, lived in different places around the lake, and all the stories end in with a similar circumstance. This woman would ask for a ride to an address on Gaston Avenue, and poof, she would disappear when the car starts to move or when it arrives at the address in question. So this sparks a frenzy of Lady of the Lake sightings. And for decades, people would write in, you know, that happened to me. You know, this happened to me last month. I saw her. She asked for a ride, you know, and she vanished. So who is this woman? Not clear. In 1927, there's a 20-year-old teacher named Hallie Gaston who died when the boat she was cruising in sank in about 20 feet of water here at the lake. In 1940, a woman named Margaret Fenders, also in her 20s, fell overboard and drowned. There have been several despondent women who have glided into the lake, and that was their final act. And then there's also there's a lady named Annie Lother who was buried at Oakland Cemetery. Now, Lother Drive is what circles White Rock Lake. I don't know that story necessarily fits because Annie Lother was not a lovely young lady when she passed away. She was well into her 40s, but it makes for a good story. In 1967, Lady of the Lake fever is at its it's at a fever pitch in Dallas, and a new radio host moves to town, and he decides it'd be a great idea to host a ghost hunt. And he encourages his teenage listeners to come out to White Rock Lake, and they're going to find the Lady of the Lake. Well, the Dallas Police Department was not too excited about this. This is in the days where, you know, if you were a radio station DJ, you had a really big following. And so the night of October 19th, carload after carload of teenagers shows up at the lake, and police start shutting down exits, and somehow the teens and the police end up in a little bit of a standoff at Cox Cemetery where we just visited. And so the teenagers start to heckle the police, and a riot squad gets called out. Apparently this DJ comes upon the scene and is like, oh no, this is not good, and slinks off and declines to take any further part. Somewhere around 2:30 in the morning, both the carloads of teenagers decide to go home, and the police decide to call it a night. The next day, that DJ got a very sternly worded phone call from the Dallas mayor. In the 1980s, a newspaper columnist named John Anders had someone who wrote in saying, "This is all a big misunderstanding. I am the Lady of the Lake. I was engaged in the 1940s. My husband-to-be and I were taking a drive around the lake. We got into an argument about our upcoming wedding ceremony. He insulted my Polish heritage, and it ended with him crashing his car into the lake. And while the Dallas Fire Department is pulling him out, a passerby gives her a ride to a nearby house. She said she never came forth with the story because she didn't want to embarrass anyone, and she saw her ex-fiance on a frequent basis, when they were both dining with their respective spouses at the Lakewood Country Club. And she did go on to say she had never shopped Neiman's. She was a Sanger Harris lady. So we don't know exactly. She did give a clue and said, if anyone can decipher this, I will give you more info and photos. And she signed her name and code as Jam Net Jade. That code was never broken. But some more recent sightings. Kevin Sorbo, who played Hercules, was a Dallas bartender and also acted in some productions in Dallas. He was making a drive around the lake with his girlfriend at one point in time and saw a very morose, sad lady. Stopped his car. He was like, "That's odd. She's in this dress. She's not a smiling beauty. Like, there's something wrong." They pass by. He stops. There's no one there. And then one of my favorites is I have a friend who is and paddleboard. Do a stand-up paddleboard when the moon is full. And my friend, I will say, smokes bales of weed. But he is also one of the most wildly intelligent people that I know, and kind of a true techie guy. And he said that from time to time when the moon is full, that a woman will float alongside him underwater. Her hair is brown though, but she's in kind of a flowing dress. He's like, I've seen some scary stuff. This doesn't qualify, but it is definitely creepy. So if you know of anyone who's seen the Lady of the Lake, let me know. I would love to hear their story.
It's like an elegant night.
Spanish. Oh, it is. And this is the classified ad that ran, historic mansion, great financing, formal and haunted. Right. The La Reunion colony in Dallas. So as East Dallas was developed, some of the names of the streets were French, and this one was named Swiss Avenue. So let me show you. So this is like when these houses were built, this was the area of town. These came before Highland Park. They're all different styles, as you can see. Some are Spanish colonial. This one's kind of a prairie style. And if you look up through the front door, you can see a very grand staircase. Second floor, third floor, you've got what's a ballroom up there. And I'm not sure if it is still a ballroom. I don't get asked to parties here. And then on the left-hand side, the light is not on, but if that is ever on, you would see it is like it is the biggest contiguous piece of glass. So it's a very large, just like huge wall-sized mirror. So it was the biggest contiguous piece of glass used in a house when it was put in. So very, very grand. And but in the 1970s, this area had really, really fallen down and gotten kind of dangerous. But, when you love a house, you love a house. And that is where the woman who lived here comes in. So this is Mary Ellen Bernstein. And I will hold my lantern up. She was born in 1916. Very beautiful. Very talented. She was a very, very good piano player. She attended Ursuline Academy, and she might have been a little bit of a fabulist because she'd like to tell some stories about herself that I have not been able to verify or disprove, but she liked to tell people that she was the inspiration for a series of statues that are around Fair Park that were created for the Texas Centennial. Hi, bike riders. Hey! After high school, she departs. She leaves Dallas and
Not hardly.
wow, this is very and more.
It's definitely not long.
All right, I'm gonna have you guys come just a little bit closer in. So after she graduates from high school, she leaves Dallas and goes to New York City. And Life magazine names her one of the most beautiful women in America. And she later on tells stories that during this point in time in her life, Cole Porter asked her to play piano at one of his parties, and that she runs around with F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda in Paris. Who knows? But what we do know is she came back to Dallas, and she had married a man named Christian Benston, who was allegedly a Belgian count. And she rolls back into Dallas in 1949, and she's very glamorous, and she becomes a little bit of a local celebrity. And this is crazy. anyway, she and her family, she convinces her sister and her parents to go in with she and Christian and to buy this house. So they're all 1/3 owners together. And, she loved to throw parties here. There are pictures of Mary Ellen behind her baby grand piano. And she's tickling the ivories until the wee hour. She loved to be a hostess here. As she ages and family members die off, she fiercely clings to this house, remembering, her glamorous days. She has one daughter, and her daughter is grown up at this point in time and is like, Mom, this neighborhood is dangerous. The house is falling apart. She was trying to maintain it on $800 a month. And, it was not uncommon for her to, wake up and in the morning and find a vagrant sleeping on the front door, etc. It was very expensive to heat and cool, and towards the end of her life her presence in this house got a lot smaller as she needed to keep cooler and warmer, and so the house is basically starting to fall apart around her. But Mary Ellen, she still loves to throw a party, and so while she's fending off her daughter's efforts to get her to move to Florida or move to the suburbs where her daughter relocates, she's all of a sudden a couple of antique dealers named Mark and Justin start to become regulars at her soirees. And from stories that I've heard, the minute they set foot in this house, they are besotted by it. And they really start going, and they think Mary Ellen is entertaining. So there's probably a lot of buttering up, and they take her to dinner, they take care of different things, and she finds them endearing. She tells her daughter they are her boys and that she's mentoring them, which definitely puts her daughter's hackles up. But Mary Ellen loves this attention and loves the fact that they love this house that her daughter does not love. The boys come up with an idea, and they say, Mary Ellen, what if you left us your share of the house and we'll get the money together to renovate and we can all move in and live together? And she's considering this possibility when in 1905 she comes out one day to get the bail, and she falls and she hits her head. And this triggers a massive stroke. And she goes to the hospital at Baylor, and the boys are there immediately. And this is where things get really, really sad. As she's laying in her hospital bed, the boys, along with their lawyer, say, hey, we've got something for you to sign. And they videotape her signing a new copy of her will. And poor Mary Ellen basically signs the house over to them. Her daughter never gets to spend another minute alone with her mother. And so when Mary Ellen passes away a few days, or I think it was about 2 weeks later, a very messy court battle over 49 Swiss ensues. And the daughter takes these two men to court, takes Mark and Justin to court, and she does prevail. And basically, and then she immediately has to turn around and sell this house in 2011. Basically, everything she earned from the sale of the house went to pay lawyers' fees, but she did it on principle because she just was so disgusted that she felt these men had taken advantage of her mom and Mary Ellen's love for this house. So as for the men, they eventually are tried in criminal court for theft of property over $200,000. One is given 1 month in jail and 4 years probation. The other man has not been tried yet. So this story used to just end there. But turns out the Countess, as she liked to be called, may still be here. We have some friends in common with the people who bought this house from the daughter and started the very extensive restoration process. The house had its 100th birthday a couple of years ago, and we had some friends that were invited to the 100th birthday celebration. And so a story was being told that some of the workers upstairs had spotted an older lady with long blonde hair and just assumed, it's the wife's, maybe that's her grandmother or maybe her mom. And so a worker tells his boss, who then tells one of the owners, "Hey, one of my guys saw your mom like walking around upstairs." And she's like, "What are you talking about? I'm the only woman who lives in this house." So perhaps Mary Ellen is still around. I
love the
think
house so
she would
much.
probably
Yeah.
be pretty excited that, you know, little by little it's getting fixed up, and I think she'd definitely be excited that people are still having parties here. So the Countess approves.
It's a really nice house, though.
It is.
It is really, really beautiful. It was crazy. I actually have been in the house before they bought it. It was on a Swiss Avenue real estate tour. I want to say like right around the 2010s or something like that. Like right after it had come out of this, or I think it was like on the market to be sold, and like you could just walk. So it was cool to see the staircase and the amazing mirror. And then it was really sad to like walk back in this small kitchen where she'd been spending a lot of her time because her oven kept her pretty warm.
And great gardens, huh?
I don't know what that is, but it's purple.
Floating in the air.
Yeah, they're drones.
Yeah. Oh,
It's modern skywriting. Huh?
so the Sons of Herman, you know, they host events here, bands play, and it is a popular spot. You know, I've known several people who've gotten married on the second floor. One sunny Sunday afternoon, a couple of members of the Sons of Herman are down here. They open at the bar, and it's our friends. Every step of the way, we're just gonna. Oh, nice. So, anyway, they've opened up the hall because there's a rehearsal that's going to take place upstairs, a wedding rehearsal. And so they hear these doors open up, they creak. There are two bar doors, one to the right and then one at the end of the hall. And they see a couple. They are dressed in Victorian style gear. She's in a big dress. He is in a full-blown, you know, suit with tails, top hat, and as they pass the second doorway, the gentleman with the top hat looks at, you know, the guys that are crowded around the bar and gives them a little nod, tips his hat, and they walk on up the stairs to the second floor. Guys are like, wow, that's pretty cool. It's a period wedding. That's nice. And so they are like, oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, and they go back to drinking beer and just shoot the shit. 45 minutes later, the bride and the groom are here. And they're like, hey, can you open up the ballroom for us? And they're like, oh, your friends are up there. Except they weren't. The ballroom door was locked, the lights were not on, there was no one up there. So, yeah, that was kind of the Victorian couple ghost that was seen. Talked to some of the bartenders here that have talked about at night, they will hear someone like follow their footsteps, like in a clump, 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 plump, plump way. And I've known different people that have run sound and for different bands, so they're up here early and they're by themselves. And they'll hear people downstairs when they know there are only people in the building and it's locked. So the 19th floor of the annex is what's called the Grand Ballroom. A lot of activities that are there, people hear music, etc. And then we're in the elevators. Those have been a constant source of problem, a constant source of drama and sadness here at the Adolphus Hotel.